Welcome to the 18th year of the Honors Senior Thesis Defenses. Thank you for taking the time out to be part of this celebration of 9 months of hard work. I want to acknowledge the following individuals who helped to keep this process going so smoothly and effectively. First, the administration and faculty at Pulaski Academy, who have supported and encouraged the students over the past 2 decades through these thesis projects. Secondly, a special thank you to my good friend, Ms. Sarah Gorman, who has been instrumental in setting up the promotional and technological aspects of the defenses this year. Her help has been invaluable to the success of the defenses. Finally, a special thanks to the committee members that have helped Miles during this 9-month process. Jimmy K. Riggs and Angela King, thank you so much for helping Miles through this journey. Without further ado, I turn it over to my good friend, Miles Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Topich. As you said, my name is Miles Collins, and my thesis is on the evolution of Black activism from the 1960s to present. The purpose of this thesis is to analyze the lessons learned from the Black Panther Party all the way to the Black Lives Matter movement and beyond. I had a very extensive literature review throughout this process. 2 primary books I used was Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton, also the founder of the Black Panther Party. And this book really helped me understand the order of operations as the Black Panther Party was run, and how it was led, and the impacts of the Black Panther movement on society at the time. And the second book I had was The Making of Black Lives Matter, A Brief History of an Idea by Christopher J. LeBron. This one was very instrumental in the making of my 3rd chapter, and really helped me understand how truly revolutionary the Black Lives Matter movement is and where it will be going in the future. And another source I found instrumental to making this was not a book, it was a documentary by Ava DuVernay titled 13th. This documentary really helped me keep together my timelines and my dates and events throughout this thesis. I was lucky enough to do 1 interview with Circuit Court Judge Wendell Griffin. He gave me a lot of his own personal experiences with the Black liberation movement and during the 1960s and 70s. And I really appreciated him and his hospitality when I was able to interview him. So I can't dive into the Black liberation movement without giving the essential and historical context of what was happening before and why we were fighting for Black liberation to begin with. Starting in the 1800s and progressing until the 1960s was the mass movement of Blacks from the American South to the American North, also known as the Great Migration. And they did this in hopes of avoiding the racial tensions that were in the South and the socioeconomic marginalization they faced in the South as well. And they hoped to find economic prosperity and sustainability in the North. Unfortunately, they did not find or evade either. They moved into the highly metropolitan areas where a process of urbanization and ghettoization occurred. And they were still haunted by that shadow of racism and violence that they were trying to evade in the South. And this really started the vicious cycle of economic despair and poverty that we still see today in Black communities. And this essentially, the marginalization of Blacks was what the Black liberation movement was really fighting against. This leads me into my first chapter, The Plight of Black Liberation. On the screen are 2 of the most influential Black activists really in history. Martin Luther King was notable for his sympathetic and nonviolent activism, and he really focused on long-term Black liberation. He wanted to see progress throughout time, and he wanted to see a mending between both white and Black communities. Malcolm X, seen to your right, was quite the opposite, really. He wanted to see short term, and if it meant for him to get violent and it meant for armed protests, which he did lead several, he was most likely to do so. He communicated the notion of self-defense to a audience that was really his target market. It was really the youth. And because of his untimely death in 1965, he was not able to fulfill his legacy to its fullest potential. Fortunately, Huey P. Newton, seen to the left, was able to do so. He was able to carry on his legacy with his partner, Bobby Seale. And this really started as a simple question, is why weren't Black liberation movements and organizations succeeding? Why weren't they doing well? And this led to a process of trial and error, where Newton and Seale spent months working together trying to figure out and formulate the perfect organization. And after they did so, they had recruiting and they had a lot of recruiting and they had just had a lot of recruitments done, and this brought in a lot of groups across the United States, but they still needed the legitimacy that most organizations have. Eldridge Cleaver, seen to the right, was the main person that brought that to them, as he was a very notable author throughout all communities, Black and white. And his novel support for the Black community and for the Black Panther Party gave them the legitimacy that they were looking for. And now that the Black Panther Party was kicking up steam and moving forward, media attention came to them very quickly, and they started asking, what was your purpose? What's the platform that you're standing on? And these can be really comprised in 10 essential points, also known as the 10-point program. The 10-point program is a series of suggestions and demands that the Black community and the Black Panther Party wanted to see fulfilled at the governmental level. Some of the points in there were closing the marginalizing gap between Black America and the rest of society, and the economic prosperity of Blacks that they were so much so fighting for during the Great Migration. And as I said previously, Newton was a disciple of Malcolm X. He still carried out those same armed protests and rallies that Malcolm X carried out. And this did give them a little bit of negative attention from the media. However, that was overrepresented, and they were still a community-based organization that wanted to help their own community. And seen in the image in the middle is a very good example of that. They gave breakfast to local children in the inner city, and a safe space for them to play and engage with each other. And this was really to show that they were not the malicious and militant group that the government and the media were portraying them out to be. And with that, as I said, that the government did portray them to be very militant, and this led to J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, seen in the top photo, to deem them a terrorist threat and national security breach, or national security threat, excuse me. And he was racially motivated to destroy the Black Panther Party, and he did so very maliciously, relentlessly, and very ruthlessly. He incriminated the party members under false charges or misdemeanor offenses that really should not have had a jail time sentence behind them. However, he jailed them for a very long time. As a matter of fact, several of them are still in jail to this day. And he attacked their families as well. He brought them down with them, and he tried to corner the Black Panther Party by forcing them all together in one area, which he actually succeeded. The Black Panther Party ended up moving into small apartments with each other, maybe 15 to 20 Panther members in a one-bedroom apartment. And this was really like their basis of operation, where they were able to fight back at the military that J. Edgar Hoover had sent in. Unfortunately, the government did prevail, and the Black Panther Party was picked off one by one, leaving a very big void in activism. As I mentioned, that this void really was left the Black voice to flounder. There was really no one to spearhead the movement, and this was exploited. This was exploited by Ronald Reagan's very discriminatory policy towards Blacks. He destroyed a lot of civil rights policies that were necessary for basic Black survival. he destroyed them so much so, and it was so thorough that it dismantled the policies implemented by the last 6 presidential administrations. So he really set back the entire Black liberation movement by at least 24 years, if not more. And this really hit the Black community hard because these policies consisted of welfare programs and food-based organizing and economic programs that were necessary for just to give them the sliver of economic prosperity that they already were lacking to begin with. And he continued to exploit that. During the time, this is the end of the 70s and towards the beginning of the 80s, that a pandemic or an epidemic was launched in the United States. And it was not one that we're like experiencing today. It was actually a one on drugs. Crack was being ravaged throughout communities across the United States, and it was cheap, it was more addictive, and it was much easier to get your hands on. And out of pure desperation, Blacks had to succumb to selling crack on the streets as a steady flow of income, and that was solely out of desperation, not because they wanted to, but it was because they had to. And he still continued, and Reagan one would think that someone would show mercy on someone who's already knocked down, but Reagan still exploited them. And this led to the decimation of a lot of Black communities. Over 700,000 Blacks fell under the poverty line. Millions of Blacks became overrepresented in prisons. And so many kids were left to fend for themselves that there were more kids left to fend for themselves or lived in single homes than there ever were in slavery. So I really thought when I saw that statistic that it was very startling to see that 400 years of slavery was beaten by just a few years of governmental deception and exploitation of Black communities. And furthermore, the overrepresentation of Blacks in prison still leads on till today. And this got even worse with exploitation from the media. Blacks were demonized in the media, and they were shown to be, for lack of a better word, heartless monsters. But in white society, it was supposed to instill fear in white societies, and they were really demonized and animalized. And in the image to your left is titled 48 Hours on Crack Street, which is a 48-hour-long CBS special that just showed endless clips for 48 hours of Blacks using crack, being arrested and being violent. And that was really to instill, it was disproportionate to what was actually happening in the United States. However, it was propaganda to instill this fear in white communities. And the image to your right is a picture of Willie Horton. The Willie Horton ad was it was a case manipulated by George W. Bush for a political gain. He used it to promote his quote unquote harshness on violence. For time reasons, I really can't get in super deep to that. But it was a lot of Blacks were manipulated and exploited for not only media attention, but for political gain. Even though even though the Black voice was so far gone and it was very exploited, there was still an outlet. 90s rap is really defined as the expression of the expressing of concerns and voicing opinions of the frustrations that are happening in Black communities by especially Black men. Black men like Tupac, Ice-T, NWA, and so many more were notorious for poetically expressing their what they experienced in their own communities every day. That type of violence that they felt and experienced all the time was what they wanted to convey in their music. And they wanted to share that with not only the Black community, but the entire United States. And in the Black community, there was a very big gap. There was a lot of fracturing between communities, and rap really became that mending structure that replenished that we're all in this together mentality, because they were all able to relate to rap in some form or fashion. But as previously I've stated, that they've always been criticized or exploited, and they still were exploited even during this time. The government actually threatened NWA for using violent lyrics towards police. They were allegedly supporting violence. They are celebrating violence. Those were all mere assumptions. It was just really to give them that sliver of what they experienced every day. And that sliver of experience really blew up in the 1990s with the Rodney King attack. Rodney King was a Black man that was being chased by over 20 police officers, four of whom, all 20 of them cornered him, and four of the officers brutally beat him. Why this was so infamous was that the attack was actually filmed by a civilian nearby, and it was sent to a news station in LA to be televised across the entire United States. So everybody saw what the civil injustices happening to Rodney King. This was a blatant use of authority, a blatant use of force, and it was a very monstrous attack. And the four police officers that were charged were acquitted of all charges. This caused a very big outrage throughout the Black community in LA, causing a 5-day riot. This is just the little of it in the image to your left. It caused over $1 billion in damages. And this really shows that despite how fragmented and broken the Black community is, or how far it is pushed down, there's always still united together. There's still so much damage that can be done in a fight for Black liberation and Black equality. And that fight led us to 2008 with the election of our first Black president, President Barack Obama. Obama's election was a big milestone in the fight for Black equality. But despite that, he was still being marginalized by society. There was white supremacists protesting and threatening him, threatening Black communities, saying that he shouldn't be president. And despite all of that, there was still, he still led our country for not one but 2 terms, which also is a symbol of strength on the Black community. This leads me to my final chapter, The New Age of Change, Globalized Activism. In this chapter, I will go over Black Lives Matter and where it will be going in the future. So police brutality is no new phenomenon in the fight for Black liberation and Black equality. It's lasted, I mean, even before police were even a thing. People of authority still physically exploited Blacks. And Blacks are statistically proven to be targeted by police. In 2015, 72% of police attacks on Blacks were on Blacks that were unarmed, and that 56% of the attacks on Blacks and the police officers were not charged, or they were let off on paid leave, or they were let off scot-free. These are 3 of the most notable cases of police brutality in the 21st century. Trayvon Martin, we all know, was murdered by George Zimmerman, who was let off scot-free. Eric Gardner was suffocated by a police officer after being racially profiled for committing a robbery that didn't even happen on the same street or in the same area. Michael Brown was shot by police and was inhumanely left for his body to rot in the hot summer sun in 2014. And as his family left him a memoriam on the side of the scene, the police officers allowed for their canines to urinate on the memoriam, and they ran over the memoriam with their squad cars. Those are just 3 examples of how police brutality and police deception have affected the Black community. And as we have seen with the Ahmaud Arbery case, that it still has not stopped. This leads me to the formulation of Black Lives Matter. After the murder of Trayvon Martin, Alicia Garza, the woman in the center, and the woman in the bottom picture in the center in the white t-shirt, took to Facebook and made a very heartwarming speech. She expressed her concerns with the targeting of Black men specifically in today's society, And she finished off the heartwarming speech with hashtag Black Lives Matter, which to her surprise took off and became a full-blown organization. And this is where I see where Black Lives Matter will, where it will blossom. It's so revolutionary because it's only as strong as the community. It's only as strong as the people that support it. There is no base of organization. There is no headquarters. There is no central location where they can be targeted. And because it's so organic, everybody who has a platform, and everybody has a platform, so everybody has a voice, they are able to use their voice to express their own concerns for their own personal problems with today's society or the injustice done to their community. And to become more of a community-based organization than a monolith focusing just on Black lives. It's LGBT, it's handicapped, it's many more, it's conservative, it's liberal, it's everything and anything and everything. And they have a huge influence on social media. Since our world is now so globalized and we basically have a supercomputer in our back pockets, we are able to express all of our concerns with today's society through Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook. And a big demographic, the biggest demographic of these people are the youth. And that's where I see the future of Black activism and just activism in general. It's going to be in the hands of the 18 to 24-year-olds that make up Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, and Twitter. And even me, I am an activist as well. I've seen firsthand the youth in my community that they are educated, they're in the know, and they're aware, and they will not stop until these injustices against their own communities, whether it be Black, white, or anything in between, until they see them stopped. And that is where Black activism is heading in the future. Thank you.
Great job, Miles.
All right. I'll start off the questions with, I know you got to talk to Wendell Griffin, a good friend of mine, and the one thing I wish we could have done more of, though, would have been interviews. Getting into the community, not just in Arkansas, maybe beyond Arkansas. If you had the opportunity to conduct more interviews, what would you have done regarding that aspect of the research?
I feel like I wanted to get more input from the youth since it is such a big demographic of activism in general. I feel like even a few interviews from my classmates would have even been a really good probably source of information and a good perspective. So I think that was probably the best one.
Why do you feel it was so difficult to find a Black voice, a Black leader in that period, after the Panthers, implode? I mean, some would argue maybe a Jesse Jackson was there as a potential leader, but it seemed like you had about a 15-year period where there's this void. Why was that so difficult?
I think that there was not as much unity in like that time period. How everybody felt like they needed to maybe fit in. There was maybe too many people trying to feel like they needed to fit in, and they themselves, and that kind of was more counterproductive than productive, that there were so many people with so many different opinions instead of coming together and trying to formulate one cause. So I think that's probably the reason as to why there was not a lot of unity. And that's why I think rap became that big voice, is that everyone came under a collective and expressed themselves through music.
I'm going to turn to, I have one more question. I'm going to come back to it later. I'm going to let Ms. Riggs have a few questions right here.
Okay. My question is, why do you think it is important to know the history behind activism in the United States first?
Wait, I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I couldn't hear you.
Yes. Why do you think it is important to know the history behind Black activism in the United States?
Well, I think primarily just so you don't make the same mistake twice. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of lessons to be learned from the Black Panther Party. It was a lot of, and if you don't know that type of history, then you're bound to make the same mistake, if that answers your question.
Okay, and how have you seen the success of Black Lives Matter?
Have I seen it?
Yeah, what are some success stories that you've seen? It could be recent or it could be like within the last 4 or 5 years.
I think how, like, to be very recent, I think how well the like multiple communities came under one collective and showed their support and condemned the government for the handling of the Ahmaud Arbery case is probably one of the biggest ones as of now. And I think that the March for Our Lives, it's really almost, I thought it was was a very holistic really rally of activism, because it was like a Black Lives Matter only speaker. There was the Parkview students came and spoke on gun laws. And I thought it was really cool because they had younger students, they had young activists speak instead of hearing the adult. We can kind of get those different levels of perspective. I thought was probably one of the biggest successes.
Thank you so much, Miles. You did a wonderful job. I'm really
Thank you.
Hey, Miles, great job. I want to compliment you because your slide setup, first of all, was really good. I love the design of your slides.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. And also, I saw a lot of growth from you in your writing throughout the year. You're one that, I just really feel like your writing improved a lot over the year. So good job. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You talked briefly about rap that emerged in the 80s and the 90s as kind of this more localized part of the movement. And, the rap that emerged really did a good job of highlighting the dichotomy between the white and the Black populations. But they also had songs, like F the Police and things like that. Do you think in the end that harm or benefited the movement in the long run?
I think it was a little bit of both, because since like, just use a comparison, the white and Black community were so drastically different, and they were so really marginalized, is that not everybody could relate to that, the lyrics in some of the songs. Is that F the Police song, a lot of Blacks could relate to that because, yes, F the police. There was a lot of that. There was a lot of hatred and towards the police because they were doing very blatant injustices to their community. However, white communities didn't see that. So they're like, oh, well, these people are here to protect us, so why are you just telling them off like that? So it did a little bit of both, I think.
Good. Also, at the beginning of your slideshow, when you were doing your lit review, you mentioned the documentary 13th. And I'm wondering what, you didn't get to speak on it too much, but what do you think the role of the privatization of prisons plays in the racial divide that we have today, and kind of that continuation of that myth of the Black criminal?
Yes, I think that a lot of it was more like freezing time, is that a lot of the people that were imprisoned back during the war on drugs and the crack epidemic, they're still in jail. There are a lot of Black Panther Party members that are still in jail today. And I think how I think it really froze time is that since there's not been a lot of change, someone who's not as like well educated on the topic, they see this statistic that Black men and women are overly represented in prisons, they may think that, oh, well, this still fulfills my theory or assumption of Blacks are always criminals, where that's really not true. And had you not known, and since you don't know the history behind it, you don't really know why that's not true. So it's kind of like an ignorance is bliss thing.
And moving forward, a lot of people said after the election of Barack Obama that, okay, we're in a post-racial society. As we move forward, what do we need to focus on?
I think trying to find that middle, not really a middle ground, but that level of understanding that just because we had one Black president doesn't mean that we didn't have 44 very racially motivated presidents as well. Not saying all of them were racially motivated, but a lot of them really were. And we especially saw that with Ronald Reagan. And I didn't touch much on it, but George W. Bush as well. So it's not just that we have one, like we're one and done. There's still a lot of fight to give. And I think a lot of people are going to understand that after the Ahmaud Arbery case and, oh, I'm forgetting her name, the EMT that was just shot in Louisville. I think a lot of people are going to understand.
Bree. I don't know her. I forgot her last name, but her first name was Bree.
Bree, right, Bree.
Questions from the audience. I'm going to open it up to the audience. I do have another question, but I'm going to let the audience chime in first. Caitlin?
How'd you know? You know, Miles, I think that not only has this been an issue for so long and continues to be, and I think it's so interesting. I've watched a lot of these thesis defenses, and it never fails. There is not a single issue you can bring up about anything that's happening in America, any disservice or injustice that's happening in this country, without hearing a significant impact on the African American community and how it's every single topic. Meredith's talking about sugar and how you know this like socioeconomic impacts and lack of health care to that population, and I mean every single aspect of injustice. And so I think it's so important that young people get behind this movement, and that one thing I do think that I have appreciated seeing on my Facebook. I have a pretty diverse group of friends, and they just, we like to think that we are socially motivated for change. And I think this celebration of, like, instead of trying to be one and the same, this celebration of African pride has been really refreshing to see. And I wonder how you feel about, this also kind of goes with male-female equality. Is everyone equal, or is everyone different and should be celebrated as such? Do you feel like this movement is kind of pushing the Black community to become more like the white community, or would you like to just, or do you see that more of a movement of celebrating the differences and making them equal? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think kind of answering the first part of your question is that one thing that me and Meredith had a lot in common was the fact that a lot of it was money based. A lot of we were used economically or for the benefit of a certain community. And in regards to should we all be different, should we all become the same, or should we celebrate our differences? I really think it's the latter, that we should celebrate our differences. There's no reason that just because I am a male, I should earn a certain percentage more than a female. There's no reason that just because I'm Black, I should earn a certain percentage less than a white male. And I think that the difficult truth is that there's an ingrained stereotype in society that just because the United States was quote unquote founded by white men, that it's a white country. And I think that really now it's more of a melting pot now, and I think that's what's difficult for a lot of people to understand, is that there needs to be that level of understanding between a Black person, a white person, or a man and a woman. That yes, you have differences. Yes, we have similarities, but that does not mean that we should be treated differently.
Questions from the audience?
I'm just proud of both of you. Even though Max chose not to present, that's fine, because this is unusual and it's stressful and everything. But y'all have talked to me for years about just your lives and what you experienced in Little Rock and Arkansas. I see you, Max. It's fine. I know your parents are doctors, and that has to be stressful on you too. So it has nothing to do with thesis, but just how are you doing? How are your parents doing?
For the most part, we're all good. We're all chilling. We're staying healthy. I always got my mask in my car. I got a mask in my room. I got hand sanitizer right next to right in my bathroom. So everything's good. And it's kind of stressful. I mean, it's like this is a very new environment that we're going to be experiencing for a long time. So that kind of level of adaptation that we're going to have is very daunting. And it's like the world that we had then is not at all the same world we're going to have in the future. It's going to be a lot less touch-based, and that's kind of stressful to look at for some people, especially people that have more traditional values, that like to go into the movies, like to go into dine in restaurants. A lot of those businesses are not the same anymore, especially now that people are understanding how to make money while also being touch-free.
I'm going to chime in with, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. Topich, go.
I'm going to chime in with my other question that I let go earlier. The fact that Malcolm X had turned towards not just the Nation of Islam, but actually away from the Nation of Islam to mainstream Islam, how did that impact the Black struggle with the Black Panthers and the Black struggle in the mid-'60s before his death?
I think that it was since he had such a large voice in the Nation of Islam, I think it really was more taken by shock. There was an effective shock to the Nation of Islam as he faced towards mainstream Islam, and that maybe he felt maybe like backstabbed in a sense. Really, for back of a letter word, they really did feel backstabbed, and that they did not feel like they were even worthy of someone as bold and powerful as Malcolm X to begin with.
It's interesting. You have obviously a Baptist preacher, Martin Luther King Jr., and Malcolm X, member first of Nation of Islam, later kind of abandons them, and that how that created factionalization within the Black movement in the 60s is kind of fascinating. We have time for one more question from the audience. Question from the audience? Anyone? All right.
I have another one if you want me to ask, and I'm so sorry.
I think I know where you're going with this. Go ahead.
Well, I kind of addressed it in your paper, Miles. What role has Black Twitter played in this new emergence of Black activism?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think that people use Twitter really more as a parody to activisms. We kind of see like all these things with like Trump putting on Twitter that's like, it's almost comical in a sense. And I think that really stems like a level of comfort in the, like different activist communities. So because we're comfortable and we're able to feel okay and safe in that environment in Black Twitter, as I feel people are more open on Black Twitter specifically. They can find a way to relate to each other through like comedy or inside jokes, but still get the same message across. So I think it's a lot more laissez-faire than say Facebook or even mainstream news.
Great. Let's give a big round of applause to Miles. Great job, guys.
Good job, Miles.
Thank everyone. I want to thank everyone for attending the sessions today. And we've got some outstanding, 5 outstanding sessions to close out the Senior Honors Thesis Defenses for 2020. Hopefully I will see everyone tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Thank you so much.
Yay.
Thank you.